The first snow of winter fell gently over our farm in Vermont when the troubles began. It was December 23rd, 1987, and I had just turned 15. My father always said that this region was special during Christmas. Something about the mountains, keeping ancient secrets that only revealed themselves when the snow covered everything. At that time, I thought they were just stories to entertain children. I was helping my mother decorate our Christmas tree when I saw the first reindeer through the living room window. It was standing at the edge of the forest that surrounded our property, its dark fur almost blending in with the shadows of the trees. There was something wrong with its posture, but at the moment, I couldn't identify what. "Mom," I called excitedly. "There's a reindeer outside." Mom approached the window, holding a partially unraveled garland. The smile on her face faded as soon as her eyes met the animal. "Sarah, go call your father. Now." The urgency in her voice frightened me. When I returned with my father, there were 3 more reindeer in the field. They moved in a strange way, as if their limbs were too long for their bodies. The snow around their hooves was stained red, which I initially thought was from the wild berries that grew in the area. "Lock all the doors," my father ordered, his voice deeper than usual, "and close all the windows on the first floor." The smell of cinnamon and nuts from the Christmas cake baking in the oven now seemed strangely nauseating. As we closed the windows, I noticed that the reindeer had come closer to the house. Their eyes. There was something deeply wrong with their eyes, I asked, unable to look away. He slammed the last window shut before answering. "These are not normal reindeer, Sarah. They are different. It happens sometimes when the winter is too harsh. They change." A sharp, metallic sound cut through the air. The wind chimes we hung every Christmas on the porch jingled violently. One of the reindeer was right underneath them now, its snout raised in our direction. That's when I saw its teeth. Rows and rows of sharp fangs, nothing like the teeth of a herbivore. "Do you remember the stories your grandmother used to tell?" Dad asked, pulling the curtains. "About why we hang bells at Christmas?" I nodded slowly, recalling the stories I always thought were just bedtime tales. "To warn us when Santa Claus is coming." "No," he corrected, his voice almost a whisper. "To warn us when something is trying to get in." The sound of the bells grew louder, and then we heard it. A wet, guttural sound, like a growl mixed with the jingling of bells. It was a sound that shouldn't exist in nature, let alone come from a reindeer. Have you ever wondered why so many Christmas stories talk about bells? Why this obsession with announcing the arrival of visitors during such a festive time? The answer was right there, in front of our house, multiplying in the shadows of the quickly fading afternoon. When the last light of day disappeared behind the mountains, there were already at least 12 reindeer circling our house, and they seemed to be waiting for something. The oven beeped, announcing that the cake was ready. A sudden noise made one of the reindeer turn its head at an impossible angle toward the kitchen window. Its black eyes met mine, and at that moment I knew this would be a very long night. The smell of the burning cake in the kitchen mixed with another odor, something metallic and wild that seeped through the cracks in the windows. Mom had gone to turn off the oven, leaving Dad and me in the living room, watching the shadows of the reindeer projected on the snow by the light of our Christmas tree. "We need to get to the barn," Dad murmured, more to himself than to me. "The tools are there." I knew exactly what he was talking about. The previous summer, we had stored Grandpa's old hunting rifle in the barn after Mom decided she didn't want guns inside the house. Now, that decision seemed terribly wrong. The bells on the porch continued to jingle, but the sound was different, more rhythmic, as if the creatures were moving in sync. It was almost like a distorted Christmas song, a macabre choir accompanied by the hungry growls of the reindeer. A gust of wind brought snowflakes against the windows, and with them, the sound of hooves scratching against the outer walls of the house. I thought of all the previous Christmases when I stayed awake trying to hear Santa's reindeer on the roof. Now, that childhood dream had turned into a nightmare. "Sarah," Mom called from the kitchen, her voice trembling. "Come here now." When we reached the kitchen, I understood her panic. The window over the sink offered a clear view of the barn, and what we saw made my blood run cold. There was something moving inside, shadows too large to be normal reindeer, and a pulsating red light that shouldn't be there. "The Christmas lights in the barn," Dad whispered. "We didn't turn them off." The lights flickered in an erratic pattern, revealing for brief moments the distorted silhouettes moving among the hay bales. With each flash, the shadows seemed larger, more numerous. What would you do if the lights that were supposed to bring joy revealed something that shouldn't exist? A loud crash from the living room made us jump. When we ran back, we found the Christmas tree toppled over. The ornaments were scattered across the floor. And through the now partially exposed window, I saw something that would haunt me forever. One of the reindeer was standing on its hind legs, its impossibly long neck stretching to reach the window. Its black eyes now had a reddish glow, reflecting the lights of the fallen tree. Mom stifled a scream when the creature opened its mouth. Oh God, the teeth seemed to have grown even more. Rows and rows of sharp fangs like needles, some still with remnants of what looked like. No, I don't even want to think about what that was. The basement, Dad decided, his voice firm despite the evident terror in his eyes. We need to go to the basement. Now, as we ran to the basement door, I heard a sound I would never forget. Something between a horse's neigh and a child's scream, followed by the jingling of Christmas bells being ripped from the porch. The lights in the house began to flicker, as if responding to some invisible force. With each moment of darkness, the sounds outside grew louder, closer. In the next flash of light, I saw through the kitchen window that the red light in the barn had intensified. It now pulsed like a sickly heart, casting demonic shadows on the snow. "They're trying to get in," Mom whispered, gripping my arm tightly as we descended the basement stairs. "Why are they trying to get in?" The answer came in the form of a new sound, hooves on the roof. But it wasn't the joyful sound children expect to hear on Christmas Eve. It was metallic and heavy, as if the very beams of the house were groaning under the weight of something much larger than any reindeer should be. The basement had always been my least favorite place in the house. The ancient stone walls held decades of family stories, and an even older collection of Christmas decorations that belonged to my great-grandmother. Now, as we hid among dusty boxes of ornaments, that place felt even more sinister. Dad found the old emergency lantern, and its light revealed something I had never noticed before. Symbols carved into the wooden beams of the ceiling. They looked ancient, some vaguely resembling snowflakes, others, something different. "These are protection runes," Dad explained, running his hand over the marks. "Your great-grandmother carved them. She knew about them." The symbols seemed to glow for a moment, or maybe it was just my desperate imagination. "John," Mom called Dad, her voice trembling. "Do you remember what your grandmother said about the decorations?" Dad nodded slowly, starting to rummage through the old boxes. "She always insisted we hang them every Christmas. She said they weren't just decorations." "Do you believe that old Christmas traditions can hide darker secrets than we imagine?" The sound above us changed. It was now more organized, as if the creatures were moving in a specific pattern. The jingling of the remaining bells on the porch began to form a distorted melody, a profane version of Silent Night. It was when we found the oldest box, hidden behind piles of ordinary decorations. Inside were garlands made of a dark, dull metal, bells of an almost black bronze, and stars with sharp points like blades. "These aren't decorations," Dad murmured, holding one of the bells. "They're weapons." Another impact, this time closer to the basement door. The lantern's light flickered, and in the shadows, I swore I saw the symbols on the beams pulsating with their own light. "The stories," Mom whispered, picking up one of the metal garlands. "About Santa's reindeer. They were warnings, weren't they?" Dad nodded, distributing the old decorations among us. "Not all reindeer serve Christmas. Some serve something much older, something that awakens when winter is darkest." A new sound cut through the air, hooves descending the basement stairs, one step at a time. The symbols on the beams were now definitely glowing, a bluish light that seemed to repel the shadows. "The stories," Dad continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Say that before Santa Claus. There was another being who traveled on the longest night of the year, and its reindeer didn't come to deliver gifts." The basement door trembled. In the silence that followed, we heard something that froze our bones, a guttural chant, coming from multiple throats at once, an ancient melody that shouldn't be heard by human ears. "They're calling," Mom said, gripping the garland in her hands until her knuckles turned white. "Calling what?" The answer came in the form of a new sound from the barn. Something much larger was moving inside. The red light pulsing through the cracks now had a rhythm that resembled heartbeats, growing faster and faster. The basement door trembled one last time, and then silence, a heavy silence, suffocating, broken only by the distant sound of bells. Not our Christmas bells, but something deeper, older. Something that made the very air vibrate with an unsettling frequency. The silence lasted exactly 12 chimes of the old family clock. Then, the basement door exploded. The first thing we saw wasn't the reindeer, but their eyes. Dozens of them, glowing with that sickly red light. The smell that invaded the basement was indescribable. A mix of pine, blood, and something older. Something that smelled of forgotten tombs and endless nights. The symbols, Dad shouted, raising one of the black bells. Form a circle. We moved instinctively, the old decorations in our hands beginning to vibrate. The symbols on the beams shone brighter and brighter, their lights connecting like a web above our heads. The first reindeer that descended the stairs no longer resembled the animal we knew. Its limbs had grotesquely elongated, and its head, God, its head now had antlers that seemed made of solid darkness. When its mouth opened, it revealed not just rows of teeth, but something writhing in the darkness of its throat. The chant, Mom suddenly whispered. The chant from Great-Grandma. I knew the song. It was an old Christmas carol that Great-Grandma insisted on teaching us every year, in a language we didn't understand. We began to sing, our voices trembling at first, but gaining strength with each verse. The reindeer reacted instantly. Their movements became erratic, as if the music hurt them. The bells and garlands in our hands began to emit their own glow. And for the first time, I saw fear in the eyes of those creatures. It was then that we heard it. A sound coming from the barn that made the very foundations of the house tremble. It was like the sound of a giant bell, but distorted, wrong. And with it came the voice, ho ho ho. It wasn't the joyful laugh we knew from Christmas stories. It was something ancient and hungry, something that wore that familiar sound like a poorly fitted mask. He's coming, Dad said, his voice strangely calm. The ancient one, the one who rode before. The reindeer recoiled, forming a corridor at the basement stairs. The cold grew intense, crystallizing our very breath. And then, he appeared. He was like a shadow wearing the form of Santa Claus as a poorly fitted costume. Too tall, too thin, his eyes. His eyes were like those of the reindeer, but worse, much worse. In his hands, a sack that writhed with its own movements. But we were ready. Great-Grandma's song reached its crescendo, the symbols on the beams pulsed, and the old decorations in our hands exploded with light. What happened next was like a nightmare in reverse. The shadows being sucked back to some place beyond reality. The screams of the reindeer turning into distant bells, and that terrible figure dissolving like smoke in the wind. When it was all over, we were alone in the basement. Outside, the snow fell silently, covering all traces of what had happened. Every Christmas, Dad finally said, reverently putting away the old ornaments. Every Christmas we need to keep the rituals, the decorations, the bells, not because they are pretty, but because they are necessary, I finished, finally understanding. What do you think really happened that night? Why do some Christmas traditions persist through the centuries? And what are they really trying to protect us from? That night, I learned that Christmas is not just about joy and presents. It's also about protection, about keeping ancient barriers strong. Because somewhere, on the longest nights of the year, something rides with its hungry reindeer, looking for homes where the bells don't ring, and the old songs have been forgotten. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to leave your comment telling which part impacted you the most. What do you think happened to the other families that didn't keep their Christmas decorations?